Hey, what's going on, everyone? It's meteorologist Brandon Adams, and we're going to dive into the storm that's moving into the region tomorrow night, January 12th of 2024, and take a look at just how similar it is to the previous system that moved through on Tuesday night and the impacts that were felt across the area will be felt again for many. So let's take a look at what we got going on here. First of all, let's actually jump over to pivotal weather. First of all, let's zoom out, take a look at the national outlook here, and show you our storm system developing out in the Central Plains, Colorado area. And unfortunately, it's not going to slide east enough to bring all snow to the region, but some may be a little surprised here. Either way, we see this low rapidly developing from 990 down to 973 millibars, 972 millibars on the Euro. Unfortunately, it tracks directly over Michigan, which leaves us on the warm side of this storm once again. Although we do have a solid foundation of cold, at least at the low levels here in most of northern New England and possibly central New England. We'll take a look at that and see how things stack up. Anyway, I wanted to point out we got a 972 millibar low here over Michigan. Pretty strong low, and you can see that pressure gradient, and that's what will bring the wind. And you can see it's kind of bashing its way into this 1024 high to the north, which if this was pushed a little bit further west, we would have a pretty solid snowstorm in through northern New England at the very least, but most of New England. But either way, I digress. We'll take a look at some of the other models, see what they have going on. Here's the 12Z GFS for today. Very similar in terms of strength and location of the low, although that high is a little bit stronger, 3 millibar stronger, which increases this pressure gradient here. Probably higher wind outlook on the GFS than there is a Euro, although that's pretty common regardless. But I do want to say that pretty remarkably consistent. I know it's a short time frame, but pretty remarkably consistent here in terms of the main low placement on the GFS and the Euro, and very similar strengths as well. Although you can probably make it out, and we'll zoom into the New England region here in a few seconds, but you can probably make it out that the GFS is slightly colder, at least initially, along the surface. I honestly haven't dived too deep into these models, so it is what it is, and I'm kind of taking a look at them alongside you guys. Here's the Canadian, just for kicks, why not, right? And the Canadian not nearly as enthused about the pressure, about 10 millibars weaker for a storm. And this highest pressure center is also significantly further south, but the same general strength here. And you can see that is also that weaker storm also leading to an overall colder solution. But regardless, it looks like most will change over to rain. So let's take a look on into the New England region especially, but we'll look at the whole Northeast, why not? And let's switch over to the Euro model here. And we can see precipitation breaks out in the region, initially starting as snow for many, especially north of the Hudson Valley here. Albany area probably is a rain, unfortunately, but just outside the Albany area, probably going to see snowflakes to start. The Berks and Western Mass, most of Vermont, New Hampshire, other than the seacoast, and most of Maine will initially start as snow, very similar to our Tuesday system as mentioned. And most places will rapidly change over to a mix and or a rain. Cold air damming will be doing its best, especially in through central New Hampshire, western Maine, into the northern Maine, up into the county. It should remain not entirely snow, but primarily snow for quite a while. And I don't see this being one that's going to wash away the rain or wash away the snowfall that you do get from this system or from previous systems. So one thing that is going to be a little bit different here on this storm system compared to the last couple is the total rainfall here. Taking a look at the Euro model here, we see that southern New England gets in on 1.5 inches, 2 inches, maybe an isolated 2.5, 3 inches pocket here. And most of Maine is around 1/2 inch to 1 inch. This is quite a bit better, and inland is up to about 1/2 inch or so. This is quite a bit less precipitation than we've been seeing in these cutter storms. Take a look at what the GFS has. So still stick with the 12Z, even though the 18 is running now. And the GFS is quite a bit more moisture working its way in through New Hampshire and Maine, and this is probably going to be a significantly higher snowfall output in through this region on the GFS just due to that higher precipitation. But since we're in range, let's take a look at the NAM. It's a higher resolution, so more defined, more detailed model, although it can do its wonky things. And the precipitation on the NAM is actually significantly lower than what the global models with the Euro and the GFS show. So obviously still a little bit of a disagreement there. Canadian, why not, right? Again, more models equals more solutions. The Canadian is more similar to the GFS for sure, with more moisture being brought southern New England, especially into Maine. The Canadian brings more moisture into most of Maine than the other models seem to. So we got that going on, and of course, with another cutter, we have to mention the wind speeds once again. I don't think these are going to be taken verbatim here, or they should be taken verbatim. I think that wind speeds are probably going to be a little bit lower than what these models are showing, but at the same time, I honestly have not looked too far into what these models are showing for wind speeds, just due to being extremely busy. So this is kind of me looking at them at the same time as you guys, once again, and giving my initial impressions here. But here's the Canadian model as we get into the storm, starting to slide up into the Michigan area. And we can already see upstate gusting to 30, maybe 40 in locations on the Canadian model, and widespread 25 plus into Connecticut, most of southern New England. As we advance this forward here, we see Vermont gusting to 40, maybe 50 in isolated locations, primarily over 30, and the Maine coastline gusting close to 50, the Cape gusting over 60 on the Canadian. And then once again, the Canadian model seems to put quite high windfall or wind speeds into the coastal region of Maine, reaching up to 65, 70 miles per hour in locations. And I'm sure just based off of the biases of the model and kind of the expectations of what I see from the model, that this is probably some of the lower wind speeds that the models are putting out. And we'll take a look at the Euro here. The Euro is slightly different. It's 6-hour max 10-meter wind gusts rather than wind speed at a given hour. So these are the max winds that were expected from the European model here. And we see 50 with isolated pockets up to 60 in through upstate, the spine of the Green Mountains in Vermont, the White Mountains in New Hampshire, all gusting to close to 60 miles per hour. And that continues up the Connecticut River Valley quite a bit into Vermont and New Hampshire. Again, 40, 50, 60 mile per hour along the Maine coastline and just inland 50 miles per hour. And then the European has just, I mean, you can see it. This is widespread, almost 40 to 50 mile per hour winds throughout Michigan, all the way to the Maine coastline and the county in Maine. So the Euro quite a bit windier than the Canadian. That's not really too big of a surprise. Take a look at the 12Z GFS. And again, this is back to just 10-meter wind speeds. So this is not the max gust. This is just at the given hour that the GFS gives you. We see 50, 60 mile per hour winds working their way into upstate, in through Vermont, New Hampshire, and again into Maine. The GFS probably the most I don't want to say destructive, but probably bringing the highest wind speeds throughout the region. And again, that's not really too much of a surprise. The GFS tends to overdo wind, the Canadian tends to underdo wind, and the Euro is a little bit hit and miss. Out of these solutions, I would believe the Euro probably the most so far. But for real evidence here, let's take a look at the NAM. The NAM, this is the 3K, so this is the highest resolution of them all. I'm not sure if the range is quite long enough. We see 50, 60 mile per hour winds in through upstate into Vermont, especially the spine of the Greens, the White Mountains in New Hampshire, and coastal Maine and the mountains of Maine up in the county as well. All 50 miles per hour, 60 mile per hour along the coastline, maybe even 70 miles per hour along the outer islands here for the state of Maine. And that's going to be a big issue is coastal flooding, especially for Maine. Timing on this system is pretty poor at the moment anyway for the state of Maine, who just had pretty bad coastal erosion with this Tuesday system setting the third record highest storm surge in Portland history, Portland, Maine, that is, obviously. And honestly, I think we have a chance to break that again with this system, as the system looks to come in with the highest wind speeds sometime around noon on Saturday, which is also coinciding with an astronomical high tide right around noon on Saturday as well. These winds, once again, from the south-southeast, and can expect some more coastal erosion, coastal damage, unfortunately, especially Maine, and probably towards Cape Cod as well. But overall, we're talking a very, very, very similar storm to the Tuesday system. It's not quite a copy and paste repeat. Winds overall are a little bit lower, at least for the time being, throughout the Northeast. Winds still plenty high enough for scattered to potentially widespread power outages, especially since these trees are just, I'm sure it's just a stress cycle on them. Super windy, and the ground's half frozen at times. We kind of freeze and then we thaw, and then we freeze and then we thaw. Not to mention, again, we have the risk of heavy, wet snowfall before the winds start to kick up into the area. I think that's what got Vermont pretty hard this last system, and honestly, it may be an exact repeat of that situation. So certainly something to keep an eye on right now. There's plenty of time for this to change, even though it's really not that far out. A couple changes here or there, especially a couple degrees here or there at the surface, can affect the inversion layer, which means that those winds aloft may not mix down to the surface. And I think that's a little bit of what happened to this previous system. I don't think it was hyped to be bad. I think it just happened to trend a touch colder, and that helped that inversion layer and meant that those winds couldn't mix down to the surface. So, again, key highlights here. We might see some coastal flooding, some river flooding, especially in central and southern New England where that snowpack is also being affected by the rainfall. Plenty of high winds once again. Winds from the south-southeast, which is never a good direction for us in this area, as our trees are accustomed to a north-northeast wind. Anytime you get a strong wind from the south-southeast, it's not what the trees are accustomed to around here. Plus, you have seasonal hardening to deal with, which means that trees are less likely to bend and more likely to just snap and fall. In that case, poor travel conditions, as again, most people will start as some form of snow, especially in central and northern New England, and then transition from there. So very similar to our Tuesday system. Once again, I know that that's probably getting annoying to listen to, but it is very, very similar in many ways to our Tuesday system. I'm not going to touch on next week's system quite yet. There's a lot of uncertainty regarding it. There's a lot of talk and banter, especially on social media, about this could finally be the big snowstorms everyone's waiting for, and it very well could be, but there is plenty of uncertainty with it. So at the moment, I won't touch on that. The one thing I will mention is that there is widespread confidence at this point that some of the coldest air of the season is going to work its way into the East Coast, into New England, especially northern New England. I don't think this is going to be extremely cold. I don't think we're talking negatives or even single digits for highs might be pushing it, but we're talking widespread teens to low 20s, single digits overnight maybe some negatives overnight, especially across the far north. But time will tell. But definitely looks to be the coldest air of the season thus far. And then we are obviously dealing with a system like every 4 days right now. So we're kind of in a little bit of a midwinter blitz, but it doesn't seem like it with all these cutters out west. So time will tell what that becomes. I think we're going to get into a much more favorable pattern here at the end of January. We're just kind of working our way through it at the moment, but time will tell. And that's about all I have on this storm for the time being. I might give you guys another update tomorrow, or whenever I can, I should say. Um, but all things considered, expect very similar to last system. Make sure you have batteries charged. Make sure you have anything you might need, gas for the generators. And if you are using a generator, please, please, please make sure it's in a well-ventilated area. There is no better place than outside. You don't have to worry about the carbon monoxide or the carbon dioxide. You just don't have to worry about it. And that would be the best scenario. So with that, that's really all I got on this system. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you do, let me know, and I'll try to do my best to make some more as we get the winter season rolling here. I'm meteorologist Brandon Adams, and I will keep you guys updated if anything changes.